Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. And I invite everyone to turn on their camera. It's not required, but helps build a sense of community. So this is the fourth in this series of 4 talks on the 4 spiritual centers and associated instinctual drives. And just to give a brief overview for anyone who hasn't been at the other ones. So the 4 centers I went through in the meditation: belly, heart, head, and then the center I'll be talking about tonight primarily is the transpersonal center over the head called the Mo, and the drives that go with that are in the belly center, the self-preservation instinct, and actually all of them, including the Enlightenment driver, come from the self-preservation instinct in one way or another. The lower drives are considered the 3 that are in the body, and all mammals have those. Sometimes we forget that we're mammals, basically, and some humans have the transpersonal, the Enlightenment drive, but not all of them. So the belly center is the self-preservation instinct, and this is really the instinct to survive, which all animals and even plants have that instinct. Plants can defend themselves too to try and survive. They reproduce and everything. So all animals have that, and the self-preservation instinct. People who usually, for all of us, we tend to focus on one drive more predominantly, and then like in the Enneagram language, and this is for those of you who know the Enneagram, there's also the subset of the instinctual drives, but you don't need to work with the Enneagram to work with what I'm talking about. But it's helpful to sort of tune into which of the drives are most predominant for ourselves, and maybe which one's second, which one third. The Enlightenment drive is kind of a separate thing, because it really is part of understanding our own, what we focus on, what motivates us, what takes up a lot of mind share. And this is extremely important for spiritual unfoldment, because if we don't work with these directly, they can leak out indirectly, and it can block our progress. It's running our behavior unconsciously. And these centers aren't so much in the Buddhist tradition. Mainly what I'm talking about tonight is from my work in the Diamond approach, and these centers are mainly from the Sufi tradition, which is also part of the Diamond approach, in addition to Buddhism and psychology. So we can see this so clearly that if we, look at the many, many teachers who are clearly realized in some way, and yet they weren't working with their instinctual drives, and they acted out on them. They had financial breaches, or they took advantage of students sexually, or they were very competitive with others, which is the social instinct, So if it's not hard to see that even people with realization, if they don't work with these drives directly, they leak out. And the way that almost every tradition on the planet up until recently has worked with the drives has been through monasticism. We just suppress them and deny them and take away all of our belongings, don't have any sexual relations or a partner. And now the monastic community is your social. Take away the family, and we're just going to have our monastic community, and that's going to replace society, basically, or any other groups you're part of. And, that's what they did, because we didn't have psychology until recently where we could actually start working with some of these things more directly. And because they're powerful. These are powerful instincts that if we are going to have a physical experience in a human body in the physical plane, we have to have a survival instinct. If we don't survive, we're not going to have a body to have a human experience. So, and if we don't reproduce, then there's not going to be more bodies so people can have a human experience. And socially, we do a lot better if we work together. So, these are drives that really are important for having a human experience with the body in the physical plane. But the problem is that they have been in competition with the Enlightenment drive. And it takes some work to actually attune those to each other. So, the self-preservation instinct is extremely strong. And if we want to see, like in the diamond approach, one of the founders, Hamid Ali, talks about us being basically the instinctual drives with a thin veneer of civility laminated over the top. And all you have to do is read the news to see how true that is. Every news story is about some instinctual drive run amok usually. So it's kind of a sad state that it's still so drives our behavior, and a lot of our bad behavior really is driven by unconscious acting out of the instinctual drives. So it's really helpful to work with them, and they're not chakras. So just to be clear, the chakras, which are very well fleshed out in the Hindu tradition, are worth working with. I've worked with those and learned about those, and they can be very helpful. But this is kind of a deeper layer, and it's not exactly the same as how it's understood in the Hindu tradition, where the chakras are all spelled out. So the belly center corresponds to the self-preservation instinct, and people who have this as their main instinctual drive focus a lot on things. And the drives really, when we start working with ourselves more deeply spiritually, we can see that the drives give us a sense of security. Instead of relying on our deeper nature to feel a sense of security, and really getting the first noble truth that no matter what we get on the physical plane, it's going to be impermanent. And we're going to, even if we like it, eventually it's going to leave, or we're going to suffer. And, we can enjoy all of the amazing beauty and experiences of the physical plane, but they aren't really ultimate. And that's what the Buddha was pointing to, was that our ultimate nature is not conditioned, it's unconditioned, and it is permanent, whereas everything in the physical plane is conditioned and impermanent. So if we're relying on those for security, they're never really going to provide a permanent sense of security. So this is where the potential is on the spiritual path to really let the Enlightenment drive kick in, and to more and more have the other drives come under the Enlightenment drive instead of competing with each other. Like, I get questions all the time, if I go deep on the spiritual path, will I be able to do work? Will I be able to have a job? Will I care about it? Will I have to give up my partner? Will I become an outcast? And these are all reflections of the drives, of the instincts, and people's sense that they're competing. And for a long time, they do feel like they're competing. So the self-preservation instinct, people will focus on food, things, money. They'll either want it or reject it. So there's just a lot of mind share that goes into those things. The heart center corresponds to the one-on-one drive, or the sexual instinct, but it's not just about sexuality. It's also people who have this drive as primary really focus a lot on one-on-one relationships. So like, people will focus a lot on romantic relationships, but also they prefer to have interactions with one person rather than in a group. They might even focus on having like a pet. There's a lot of loneliness if there isn't an other to be sharing life with, and I think a lot of people get pets to fulfill that need, or there can be a rejection. Again, like with the self-preservation instinct, there can be a rejection of needing that. No, I don't need it. I'm raw rock. I'm self-sufficient, but then inside there's like this secret longing for it. So that's just a snippet on the one-on-one drive. Also, that can lead to a lot of time and energy spent on, really obsessing about parenting, reproduction, all of that. And then the social instinct, which corresponds to the head center, is is about the tribe, that I'm going to be a lot safer if I'm in the tribe than out of the tribe. And, you know, I really like watching videos of wolf packs. And you can see that the wolf who's misbehaving, that's what they do, is they kick that wolf out. And that wolf is not very likely to survive compared to being in the pack. So, you know, in human history, when we got kicked out of the tribe, same thing for us. So that sense of, you know, I better not do anything to get kicked out of the tribe. This is why the fear of public speaking is higher than the fear of death, over and over and over in surveys. You know, why do we feel that way? Well, what if I do something stupid in front of the group and they want to kick me out, you know? So, I mean, this is the social instinct in action. So we think these things are far off from us, but they're really not. You know, we don't want to be, or we fight against the group. Some people will engage the social instinct by being the rebel or the counterculture, but, you know, there's still the same enmeshment with the group. So that's just a snippet on the other drives. And so tonight I'm going to talk about the Mo Center just briefly, and then the Enlightenment drive, which really anyone on a spiritual path, I believe, has some contact with and some activation of their Enlightenment drive, even if they're not so much, you know, saying they're focused on awakening or things like that. Just the fact that somebody can want to meditate regularly, would be interested in what's beyond our normal sense of reality. All of those things point to what is known as the Enlightenment drive. So this center is, it's not common to have that center open. So just to say that, it's very hard to find any information on it out there. It only opens if all three of the lower centers are both open and fairly cleared out of personality material and aligned. And then it's possible for this center over the head, this transpersonal center, to start becoming active and known to the person. It's over the head. It's a transpersonal center. So, you know, it's not even in the body. It's part of the individual consciousness that we have, but it isn't physical. So it's part of our individual consciousness that intersects with the boundless consciousness that is what the Buddha was really pointing at, with the potential to know what we are beyond the conditioned. So he was really pointing at what in Buddhism is known as the boundless dimensions, and this sense of knowing what we are that is beyond the body and the personality. So when I talk about awakening, a lot of you have seen this, but I'm just going to do it again for anybody who hasn't. Like, our normal perception of reality is this. So, you know, this is like each finger being one of these is me, and one's you, and one's your computer, and, you know, the garbage can, and this, everything looks separate. And from this perspective, that is true. But then if I take the paper away, you know, then we can see that these fingers have something deeper than just the finger. And like, if I do this, I can feel the finger down here. So where does the finger really end and the hand begin? But ultimately, the hand is more fundamental than the finger. And our consciousness can be here in the boundlessness in which, are these fingers really separate from down here? From this perspective down here, the fingers aren't really separate. So that's part of what happens with awakening is yes, we still have a separate body that is going to, you know, when my body dies, your body isn't going to die. So there's a reality there of, at the physical level, that there is something that's separate. But at the level of consciousness, consciousness doesn't have to be bound by the body. So if that goes here, then we know not only that we're not separate from others, but that we're not separate from anything in physical manifestation, and that there's something deeper, that even if that physical form goes away, there's something more fundamental about that is lasting. And this is what we can happen with our consciousness, is we can know ourselves as our deeper nature. And that is known as awakening, or taste of awakening, or no self is when we see that we are something beyond the body and the personality, where we've taken ourselves to be the personality, and we see that's an empty construct of the mind. And that's a no self experience. So all of these things, when I talk about awakening, enlightenment, I'm pointing to that experience, not just like an intellectual knowing, but an experience of it. So, so the Mo center is the part of our individual consciousness that also intersects with the boundless, and it is non-physical. So when this becomes active, it really operates on its own, and it isn't under like the volition of the ego self. It's something that happens as a person's consciousness and their dharma, their purpose for being in the world involves working transpersonally. So again, it's not that common, but the enlightenment drive is a lot more common. So I'll talk mainly about the enlightenment drive. So the enlightenment drive is an instinctual drive that some humans have, but most don't. So, you probably know lots of people, friends and family members and so on, who don't get why you're interested in spiritual practice, who don't want to meditate, who aren't interested, who just don't get it. Even if they're supportive of you, their enlightenment drive isn't active at all. And I found that over the years that I have really dear friends who are really evolved people, but they just don't have an active enlightenment drive. They're just not interested. So it's not something, it seems to be something that we either come in with or that activates somehow on its own. And it's not that easy to activate in another person. So, I can't speak to what that is about, but for those who do have it, and I think anybody who is coming to, Dharma talks and things like that has some of that as part of their makeup, because there's an interest there. So, unfortunately, most of humanity is driven solely by the three animal instincts. And hopefully over time, there'll be more and more people that have some contact with the enlightenment drive, because even if a person isn't in any of the stages of awakening, they're just practicing. Imagine what the world would be like if everybody had a spiritual practice. They wouldn't even have to be that evolved, but just the intention and the interest, this planet would be a paradise, because we find ways that nobody would be starving, and we'd work out conflicts without killing each other, and there'd be enough shelter, So just that inclination alone, I feel it's, in my view, part of where humanity's going if we survive long enough in the physical realm to experience that as a species. And, it's not clear whether that's going to be possible or not. But this drive is, in my view, a drive to spiritualize the physical realm, to bring spiritual understanding into the density of the physical realm. And so when a person is trying to live as a spiritual practitioner, as a householder, that's basically what you're doing. You're trying to bring your spiritual understanding into regular life as a person, where you're dealing with all of these drives. You have to own things to survive. You have to have a job, you have to earn money, you have to deal with money. You have to, you have the option of having a partner or having a romantic relationship if one wants to have that, having children, having a family, being part of groups. All of these are fraught with triggers. in our drive. So this is part of the material that we need to work through on the spiritual path, so that those drives aren't running us unconsciously, and they're serving the enlightenment drive. So so unfortunately, most of humanity doesn't have any sense of that, but they can, people can still be very refined humans without the enlightenment drive and be very big contributors to the human condition. But it won't go deeper than that. There isn't an interest in the deeper questions. So when somebody's enlightenment drive is active, there's a sense of a desire to know what is there a reality beyond the physical dimension? Is there something more? Like these questions that spiritual practitioners have been asking for millennia. Even early on, this was active fairly early in the human condition. We can see spiritual practices, earth-based practices, where people were asking these same questions, like, where did I come from? And what happens when I die? And, is there a way I can know a bigger reality? Maybe having had tastes of a bigger reality. Because any of us can have a taste of our deeper nature at any time, because it's been there every second of our lives, other than when we're in deep dreamless sleep. Every second of your life, your deeper nature has been there, every second. So it's possible to have glimpses of that at any moment. Even for non-spirit people who aren't on the path can have those glimpses. And those glimpses sometimes are the most meaningful moments of a person's life. Unfortunately, if they don't have any context for it, it usually just dissipates. And I've had people come to me and say, I've had these experiences when I was a kid or a teenager in my 20s or whatever, before I was on the path, and I didn't know what it meant. So I forgot. So there's probably a lot of people whose enlightenment drive isn't very active that have experiences like that, and it doesn't really get to land. So, that's part of the benefit of those of us who are householders. If we know of people who are a little open, we can just put it out there so that if they're interested, there's a safe place they can go and learn more. That doesn't seem weird, But so, we have an interest in something beyond the physical. And if somebody has had any kind of taste of non-duality or awakening taste of our deeper nature like this, and it doesn't even have to be meditating. It could be out in nature, seeing a sunset or being with somebody who is dying, or at the birth of a baby. Or like I've heard people in car accidents where it's like, you really feel you're going to die, and there's a glimpse into something more. So, I hear a lot of these stories because a lot of people come to me for validation of these things, because it's hard to find anybody who will talk about it, which is kind of crazy because it's exactly what the Buddha was pointing to. So when our enlightenment drive is active, we're interested in that. Even if we don't know a lot about it, there's like some drive to learn more, to read books or listen to talks, or, attend Sangha events, to meditate. All of these things to me are reflections of an activation of the enlightenment drive. And some people will do anything. Some people have a really strong enlightenment drive. I gave my first interview that I ever did, it's been like 10 years ago now, by Conscious TV, was they asked me a lot about this, and they entitled that whole talk, Living the Enlightenment Drive. And I mean, I did a year-long solo retreat where I practiced for a whole year, mostly in silence, on my own, most of it. I mean, that's a strong enlightenment drive. Now I look at that and I think, how did I do that? I'm not sure I could do that now, but my enlightenment drive was just so strong. My biggest fear was that I would end up unbalanced and I would become homeless. And once there's a risk of mental, psychological instability when you do a year-long solo retreat. I had teachers who wouldn't work with me because they weren't sure I was going to be able to maintain mental health doing that, you know. And once I accepted that I might end up unbalanced and homeless, then I was okay. And that's how strong my enlightenment drive was, that I thought it doesn't matter. I have to do it anyway. So, you know, and there's people like, look at the Buddha. I mean, the man was eating 1 grain of rice a day. Talk about a strong enlightenment drive. You know, he was so emaciated that he was like a skeleton. So people, you can look throughout history and see people whose enlightenment drive is really strong and what they're willing to do. And it's almost like that drive does subsume all the others. Even physical survival doesn't matter so much. Ramana Maharshi, when he had his huge awakening, he didn't even care about eating. They had to make him eat. So, you know, that's kind of an extreme version of it. But most of us have something that's more mild, and really, like, there are practices to cultivate this. And in Tibetan Buddhism, the practice of bodhicitta is a practice really about the enlightenment drive. And a lot of times we'll feel that drive, like sometimes it's talked about as the flame for awakening, that we feel it like with the bodhicitta practice, which I teach now as one of the heart practices. We feel it. Bodhicitta means the aspiration for awakening for ourselves and for all other beings. So it's the aspiration to awaken for the benefit of all of being. Even, you know, animals in the earth, all of beings. So we're not saying that we know that's going to happen in this lifetime, but we're having that aspiration. And when people can feel that, it's usually felt in the heart as like a longing. You know, like if you read Rumi poems, you can see and hear Rumi talking about this longing for the beloved, or Hafiz. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about this longing to be one with the beloved. And it's, you know, a little bit more of a theistic way, or in Christianity, when they want to merge with God. This is basically their enlightenment drive. They just are talking about it in a different way. So a lot of times it is felt as a longing to know more, to know our deeper nature, to know the things we've heard described in books by people who have had these experiences. And when we hear those things, somehow it's like a tuning fork. It's like a resonance, and something in us says, oh, yeah, I need to find out more about that. You know, so that is a way we can feel our own enlightenment drive when we read these things, and there's something that activates in us where we want that, you know, we have that longing for going deeper in that way. So I talked about how, you know, pretty much throughout history until recently, it has been seen as an either or. You either go into the monastery and you work on your spiritual path, or you're a householder and you just give money so that others can do it on your behalf, basically. I mean, that's how it was in Buddhism and Christianity. Or, you know, I mean, in some places for Buddhism, you gave the money so that you could get a better rebirth, so you could be a monastic the next life. You know, in Christianity, we have pass around the plate so you can go to heaven. So, you know, there were basically, most people were doing it from a self-preservation standpoint, where they were giving so that others who were practicing deeply could do it kind of on their behalf, or that they would get good karma from that. And that was a lot of how it's been seen historically, not for everybody, but for the majority of people. That's how it was seen. And what's happened, what's cool over the last like 50 years, and I've talked to a lot of other teachers and practitioners who have seen the same thing, that there's more and more people who are living as householders, really feeling called to have a deep practice and as a householder. And that's really what happened to me. And that's what I want to be doing. My teaching is helping householders who are really feeling a calling to a deep practice to live as a householder with a mortgage and a partner and kids maybe and a job and all that, and still maintain a deep practice. And that's where I think our era, with the advent of psychology that we've had in the last 100 years, we actually have the possibility of working with these instinctual drives, so that we can thin them out and not just push them into the unconscious, which unfortunately just about every tradition out there has done. And you can see it in all the scandals. You know, there weren't the technologies to really work directly with the instinctual drive. So now we have more, and it's less of a taboo to talk about these things. You know, we've had, just in our lifetimes, we've had where people used to revere teachers so much that no matter what behavior they were doing, nobody said anything. And now people are saying something like, no, this is not okay. You know, so we're challenging the idea that the drives can't be harmonized, which I think is really an amazing development for humanity, because we've got to have people in the world living as regular householders who have deep practices, or, you know, humanity is going to be doomed if we don't have that, in my opinion. So it's a great thing that in the last 50 years, we've had more and more people having tastes of awakening and having deep practice as householders. So it is possible that these drives, so that our survival, our relationships, our belonging, all of that serves awakening and serves the greater good of the totality. And when that's harmonized, then there isn't any conflict, or there can be less of a either or between our actually having a human physical experience in this realm and being deeply on the spiritual path. So let's see if there's anything else I want to say, and I'm just going to open it just to get a little more light on. Yeah, so really the only practice that I know of that works with this directly is bodhicitta. And in this practice, we, like in Tibetan Buddhism, in the Dzogchen lineage that I mostly practice in, at the beginning of every sitting, they spend, you know, a few minutes, 5 minutes, feeling their flame for awakening, feeling that longing, and then having the sense that their practice, when they're meditating, that they're not just doing it, we're not doing it just for ourselves. You know, there can be that sense that I'm just going to I'm just going to slog it out until the end, until the bell rings, just to get it over with, you know. And when we feel we're doing it for all beings, there's a lot more of a sense of purpose in it. We're already connecting with this. When we're practicing for the whole, which I really feel, this isn't just a euphemism. When we're thinning out our consciousness, we are directly benefiting the totality of consciousness. Because if we're having less greed, hatred, and delusion in our own consciousness, that is going to help the totality of consciousness. And we're not going to get any awards for it. Nobody's going to come and thank us. But inside, if you really believe that you're thinning out your consciousness, you are benefiting humanity in the most important way possible. And that's why in Buddhism, the highest good karma that you can get, highest merit, is your own practice. So I really believe it's true. And, you know, this is where cultivating our enlightenment drive and really, you know, fanning that flame can really be a huge boon for our practice, and can make our practice a lot more juicy and alive and robust and meaningful, rather than just, I'm going to sit and, you know, grunt it out until the bell rings. So anyway, I think I will stop there and see if there are any comments or questions about any of this. Yes, Michael. And you need to unmute yourself.
I do have a question in regards to how you have spoken about meditation. But first, I just, as you were speaking, it made me think of a quote, I think attributed to Thich Nhat Hanh, where he has said, the next Buddha won't be an individual, but will be the Sangha.
Oh, wow. I love that. I love that. Yeah. I hope that's true. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
But my question is in regards to sometimes you have spoken about meditation as being one of two things, or one of two energies are happening in meditation. One is transformation, which I would think would be like working with those first three drives. And then you speak of transcendence, where I think may be speaking more to the Enlightenment instinct. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be one way of framing it. I mean, a lot of times, most of the time when I'm teaching, people don't know about the instinctual drives unless I've given those talks. So I often will talk about it as just working with our personality patterning. I mean, there's patterning that goes beyond the instinctual drives that's more particular to us, that we can link back, like in Buddhism, to the hindrances and defilements. So that's another way of understanding the transformational part of our practice, kind of when we're slogging through the personality material. But a lot of those are fed by the instinctual drive. So that would be, a way to like hook those up, would be that we've got our own unique patterns that in Buddhism are reflected in the hindrances and defilements, but they are also driven by those drives. Like a lot of times, comparing mind, for one. A lot of people have comparing mind and notice it on retreat. Well, that's mainly part of the social instinct. Where am I in the pecking order? Am I better? Am I worse? Everybody's a better meditator than me. Or, oh, I had a really good sit. I bet I have the best sit in the room, things like that.
I'm the last one to leave.
I'm
the last one to leave the hall.
Right. So I must be more dedicated. Yeah. So yeah, linking those to the drives is another way to nuance those out and to sometimes see things that are so accepted by society, or so we're blind to, working with the instinctual drives and understanding what's going on in each drive, which when I post the other talks, I've really fleshed that out more. It's a way of going, oh, wow, that's my one-on-one instinct in effect. I can see what's going on there, or, so yeah, that would be a way to connect those.
But I kind of, the reason I asked the question is because I'm curious more about how you characterize the transcendent part.
Okay, yeah, the transcendent part. So yeah, when we're practicing and we're having, some time where we're having a good sit, or we're with our meditation object, or maybe we're feeling a little bit blissful or peaceful, we have some equanimity. All of those are tastes of our deeper nature. And then there's, full on things like a non-dual experience where we're, down here for a second or some time. But all of those are tastes of our deeper nature, and part of that, and they're very motivating. And a lot of times teachers will, I've heard people tell me this, that you'll go in and report one of these really amazing experiences, and teachers will say, oh, just ignore that, don't get attached to it. And it's not that that's bad advice, but that doesn't help it land with the person. So my encouragement is, if you feel you've had an experience or some experiences that were really profound, and like you're longing to have them and get back there. I mean, we can't get back there. That's the problem, is if we're trying to get back there, we're not in the present anymore. But they can serve to inspire us and to know that this is possible for you. It's not just the Buddha or the teacher, that you and your consciousness have had tastes of this. And that can really serve to inspire and motivate us and give us also have it land in our bones that this is here. You know, even if I'm working from memory, I know what that felt like. So I really encourage people to let those experiences land and it's fine to treasure them and to have them motivate and inspire your practice.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Rafaela. Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah. So, hi, I was really curious about what you were saying about how the biological instinctual drives could serve the enlightenment drive, because in my experience, like in myself, they want nothing to do with each other. They seem completely different. Like, you know, years ago when I first started doing spiritual practice, I literally wanted to like knock out my 2 front teeth and shave my head to like get rid of my desire to look attractive to men. And I feel like, honestly, I've been like my enlightenment drive and the sexual drive is so like, they felt like a huge war. And like, honestly, I feel like the past 2 years, I've just been like living in this total delusion, chasing the sexual drive, and like all my spiritual practice went away. And it honestly kind of scares me because it's so strong. And you know, I've really struggled with it because it's like, okay, you know, when I have a desire for sex or like for a man or this like intense intimacy, I think of it as like, oh, well, there's a self there. That's a desire. That's bad. Then I try to get rid of it. And recently I kind of came to this like recognition that like, that's not it. And that brought me a lot of relief. And then I've been listening to Shinzen Young and like realizing how like being like crystal clear with the strands of experience. So like when desire arises, like, you know, it's the grasping and aversion around it that's sort of the problem, but it's not actually the drive itself. Like I can let that drive fully like manifest, and like maybe I'll act on it, maybe I won't, but I'm not like deluded that that's going to be it, you know? So that's how I'm sort of coming to peace with it and like allowing that drive to be there, but not like trying to get rid of it or totally acting out on it. But I still like, so to me, it's sort of like, okay, this desire is always going to be there. It's part of being human. And I feel like I can work with it and I can understand that it's impermanent and not give it too much weight and sort of hold it more gently. But when you said we could use that drive to serve enlightenment, how does that work?
It is that you know, the sexual, the one-on-one instinct is one of the harder ones. I mean, they're all hard in their own way, because if a person, whatever our main drive, that is hard, you know. So if that's your top of the drives, it is one. And you know, society tells us we should be partnered, especially for women. You know, there's a lot of societal norms and pressure that add to what's already there. So just to say that, you know, that is also comes into the mix. And now it's the social instinct is part of it, because we are pressured to, you know, conform to societal norms and so on. So with sexual instinct, part of how they can serve it is if a person's in a relationship that's healthy, it gives a sense of secure attachment that can kind of let that instinct rest. So that's one way it can serve the drive, is by giving us kind of a secure home base as a human. The sexual part of it, though, without a partner, there's all of the tantric practices and the Taoist energy practices. And like when I was doing my year-long solo retreat, I was doing the women's Taoist practices to funnel that energy up. So normally if the sexual instinct is in, like, I now speak from chakras, like the second chakra, it's going to try and get acted out through the body, through being with a partner, physical release of some kind. But if we're using it as a spiritual practice, like monastics have done this for a long time, because they're celibate, they move the energy up to the heart center, and it can come all the way to the head center and out the top, and it can actually be energy. I mean, this is energy that creates new humans.
Right.
You know, it's pretty powerful. It's powerful energy in the physical plane because it's creating new humans. So can we use it through actual spiritual practices that are designed to use that energy for clearing out our material and clearing out the body? So, you know, there are books, the Taoists know a lot about working with it. And I don't recommend Kundalini and forcing it. I think that can be dangerous. But if we're just channeling, I mean, just at a really basic level, to channel it up to the heart center, then it can become a little more universal. So that's a way of working with that instinct and the energy behind it to actually be fuel for the practice specifically. And, you know, they can also be channeled up through the head center. So, you know, that is a way that we're not like pushing it down. We can see most of the scandals that are out there in teachers are around the sexual instinct, the really bad scandals. And it happens a lot, you know? So clearly they weren't working with it appropriately and they weren't noticing, they were thinking about it thousands of times before they acted it out. Why didn't they go talk to another teacher about their thoughts, you know? So, so there are ways. I'm really glad that you felt comfortable bringing it up because that's the first step is not pretending and working with reality. And whether you want to be in a partnership or not in a partnership, if this is your main drive, it's going to take work to whether you're in or out of a relationship, it's still going to take work because it's your main drive. And whatever our main drive is, some people it's the self-pres. I mean, I know people have millions and millions and millions of dollars and they're still workaholics. What's going on there? You know, there's never going to be enough. So, you know, for them, it's the self-pres and it's about money. And it's hard for them to stop because they're going to feel insecure if they stop. So all of us have, you know, whatever our thing is. And I'm just giving you some of the ways to work with it. The other way is like when you're in relationship or you know, dating, things like that, it's a hard place because there's so much vulnerability around it because of rejection and all these other things. But to see if you can bring consciousness and presence to the dating, to the match.com, you know, to when you're liking somebody, to when they don't like you back, or when somebody likes you and now you're kind of, you know, feel yourself tumbling into unconsciousness. It's a hard place to stay conscious, but it is possible. So, you know, it's hard and really it's bringing ourselves to whatever's happening in our life, bringing consciousness and our practice to it, including things like dating and sexuality. Or if you decide to be celibate, I mean, that is another option. I've done that for a few different periods in life on purpose to say, I want to work through my longing for the relationship. Mm. And I'm going to be celibate to work through the longing. So that's another way to work with it, is to actually do it on purpose, where you're doing a certain kind of renunciation temporarily to see if you can get the compulsiveness off of it. Mm-hmm. It's really the compulsiveness. I mean, I think maybe what Shinzen Young was pointing to was the compulsiveness. These things are going to rise because we're in human bodies that are supposed to reproduce so there can be more humans. You know, It's a strong drive, but we don't have to act it out, and we can work with it internally to thin out the compulsiveness of it. And it is possible that being in a relationship, well, and then there's all the tantric sexuality practices you actually do with a partner. And those, I mean, it's part of Buddhism. It's an actual practice path in Buddhism that's been around for thousands of years. So, you know, that's another way to use the sexuality if we're in a relationship with a partner, through the sexuality with a partner. So, you know, there's a lot of ways. These things haven't been talked about a lot because of all the taboos around it, but there are experts out there. I'm not an expert in these things, but there are experts out there that can do it skillfully, and there's those that don't do it skillfully. So it's important to be discerning about who you would whose teachings you would take in. But, you know, they've tried the tantric path of Buddhism really said, we're going to embrace everything and not exclude any aspect of the human experience from the path. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about.
That was really helpful. Thanks. One last question I have. So with these instincts, the way that you work with them is not, what I'm hearing from you is not through rejection, but through like sort of holding them in their proper place and sort of having the enlightenment drive be the ultimate, maybe, I don't know if it's the goal, but the ultimate is to have like the enlightenment drive be the primary force. And then these other things are there and they can be used and worked through, but you're not like rejecting them.
Right. That if we're going to be householders,
right,
I don't see any other way, because we're going to be engaging with money and one-on-one relationships and possibly partners and, you know, social groups. So, you know, we're going to get triggered. And I think they even got triggered in the monastery. So, you know, the triggering doesn't go away just because of our setting. But yeah, if we're going to work with it, this is a way to work with these things in a mature way, and to go into them and try to open them up so that really it's the compulsiveness, having the compulsiveness be taken off. That's where we start suffering and or hurting others. You know, hurting ourselves or others through it. And that's where we want to see if we can be conscious, and, you know, working with a teacher can help also.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so we'll stop there, and I'll just end by wishing for all of us that our lower instinctual drives can come to serve the Enlightenment drive, and for that to be a potential for all of humanity in service of the greater good of the planet. So be well, and I'll look forward to being with you again in November.